from training.tv, where we're here to talk about the wonderful FileMaker platform. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer today. And if I can find the other two here, I am here today with Wim Decorte and Jacob Taylor, who are both masters of FileMaker Server. So generally on stream, we talk a lot about FileMaker Pro, but every once in a while, we'll get on and we'll have serious deep dives into FM Server, usually with Wim Decorte or Jacob Taylor. Today we have them both on. It should be really entertaining, and I'm very excited to talk about it. Before I hand it over to them, let's talk about the schedule. We do this 5 days a week on 3 different platforms. A quick reminder what those platforms are. We have Discord, YouTube, and Twitch. A big part of how we do the stream is to keep it really conversational. So I like to have questions. I like to grab the questions from the community and interact with the community and forward them on to the presenters. So real quick, today we're doing, frankly, it's about the new 21.1 release for FM Server. There's a lot. We're going to be covering PSOS and PSOS specifically, but also talk about a lot of other general topics very speedily. If you'd like to support the channel, you should probably pick up this. People who have bought it, thank you very much. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but basically, if you don't like the live stream training environment or the free videos or how we do any of this, you should go look at our actual recorded videos. They're very small. They cover very specific topics, and they are pretty cohesive. There's literally hundreds of hours of content spread over like 4 to 30-minute videos at max. I think that's probably good. I'm going to hand this over to Wim and Jacob. Hi, you guys. What are we doing today?
Hey, Margaret. We will be talking about that new feature in FileMaker Server 21.1, specifically about the ability to do a perform script on server session within the perform script on server session, which is something that is entirely new. So I'll do a bit of a level set in the beginning here to talk about the scripting engine on the server, but we'll cover some interesting consequences of this new feature. Also some caveats, things to watch out for, things you need to be aware of. And then basically Jacob and I will riff a little bit about what we think is great about it. All right, very good. So in order for everybody to be on the same page here, I want to talk briefly about FileMaker Server, specifically when it comes to what it can do for the clients and for the APIs, right? So what we see on the screen here is all the things, all the clients, the different types of clients that FileMaker Server serves. The ODBC and JDBC client, we can leave off for now because those cannot run scripts. That's just a data integration kind of thing. You can extract data from FileMaker, you can push data into FileMaker, but you cannot run scripts, right? All of the other, on the right-hand side, the APIs, Data API, OData API, and the old XML API, those can run scripts in addition to just exchange data, right? So that's really what we're getting at. And FileMaker Server has 3 script engines. It doesn't have to one. It has 3 different distinct script engines that serve different purposes. FMSE, or the FileMaker script execution, I believe, is what that stands for. That one is responsible for any perform script on server you throw at it. Right, so those, whatever comes from FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Go, from WebDirect 2, but we'll cover that later. That goes to the FMSE script engine. That one is also used by your schedules. If you set up your schedules in FileMaker Server, then that's the scripting engine that is going to be used by that as well. Now, here's the thing that is mostly unknown. The FMSE, the scripting engine, is also used by the OData API. A lot of people think because the Data API and OData API, when you look at the admin console, you configure them in the same place, roughly. And they came about at the same time, again, roughly, that they basically share the same scripting engine. They do not, right? All scripts that you run through the OData API go to the FMSE scripting engine. And keep that in mind because that's the important bit that will come back later in a bit. The second scripting engine has been there since forever, is used by WebDirect and the old XML API. Or if you used to do the PHP API, same difference, right? That one is no longer, but the old XML API is still a valid API if you want to use that. I wouldn't recommend it, but we still have a couple of deployments out there that still use it. So whenever you run scripts in WebDirect, in your WebDirect session, or through the XML API, those go to the web publishing engine scripting engine. So that's engine number 2. The third one is used only by the data API, right? So the data API gets its own scripting engine, whereas the OData API doesn't. That one goes to the FMSE. Now, for the longest time, the data API engine and the web publishing engine were already able to use perform script on server. So think about that for a sec, because it's an interesting concept. Because you may be thinking, I have a WebDirect session and I have a script that runs and I do perform script on server. You think WebDirect is already on server, so it's really all in the same place. It isn't, right? When you do perform script on server from inside a script that runs in WebDirect, you're actually handing over between two different script engines. Your normal script runs in the web publishing engine, and you now through PSOS ask or invoke a different script engine, the FMSE, to run that script for you, right? Same with the data API. The data API, since its inception, has been able to use perform script on server as one of its supported script steps. What is now new is that the FMSE, the scripting engine that already does PSOS, can now also do PSOS. For the longest time, you couldn't. And I'll show you that in a sec when I drop into FileMaker. Perform script on server was a not supported script step when you were already in a PSOS session or in a script that was fired through a schedule, right? So because those were doing the same thing, right? So up to FileMaker 21.0, you cannot do PSOS inside of PSOS. And probably some of the people are saying, yes, you can. There's a feature flag and you can enable it. All true, but you were not supposed to, right? So officially, it didn't run and you weren't supposed to use it. So now it is officially supported. So that's the whole new feature. If you are in a script that is inside the FMSE scripting engine, by way of a schedule or by way of a PSOS, now you can use PSOS inside that script. Right? Just briefly, when you're inside FileMaker Pro on the right-hand side, and I'll drop into FileMaker in a sec, you have this drop-down that basically shows you what script steps are compatible with the different engine that is going to be responsible for executing your script. That's the compatibility view. So FMSE, that's what it's called server. The data API is called data API. WPE is called WebDirect. What isn't really clear from this is that server is also the one for the OData API, right? Remember the previous slide there. FMSE is the one responsible for the data API. So when you read server in that compatibility list, it's really just server plus OData API. And Jacob and I were just talking about this a little beforehand. They all three support plugins, but they all three have a different place of putting those plugins, right? So there isn't a thing like I'll install this plugin on server. That doesn't exist. Well, it does exist, but
that only hits one of them.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to know what engine you're going to be using so that you put the plugin in the right place for the engine. And you could put the same plugin in the three different places. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that. You just need to be aware that you have to do it and you have to put the plugin in the right place. It's kind of interesting. I'm sure, Jacob, that you're not in love with that either. You can't really tell which plugins are installed except for the FMSE scripting engine, right?
Yeah. That's an improvement I would like to see, honestly. Ideally it'd just all be in the same place. I think that's the actual best option, but in the absence of that, having server, WPE, and DAPI plugins listed kind of the same way server currently is, version info and whatever, I think that would be helpful at least to display if we're going to have three engines. So
I agree.
If it doesn't get consolidated, basically, if they don't make that choice. So
yeah. That's actually a good one because I never think about consolidating. I'm not sure if there's a technical reason why they couldn't, but I agree. At the very least, if you display them for one, display them for all three, because the added benefit of having them displayed for the FMSE is you can selectively enable or disable, like your troubleshooting. You can go to the admin console and say, I don't want this one for now. Let's see what happens. So you don't have that visibility with the other ones.
That used to actually be incredibly helpful for debugging, which I haven't actually seen in a while. So plaudits to all of the plugin authors. But there used to be like cross plugin, I'll say compatibility issues that you could run into, or they'd fight with each other, or call the same thing at the same time or something weird. And so you'd end up with like instability in your FileMaker server, and you had to sit there and like turn off individual plugins and see which ones actually, like which ones are not playing nice. But again, haven't seen that in a while, but it was incredibly helpful back in the day. So
Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen that in a while, but when it did happen, it was pretty scarring, right? You're referring to the thread save where a
yeah,
plugin could step on each other, and then they would make
it
make a
yeah,
crash.
and I think before maybe the most recent plugin related improvements in the platform that used to take FileMaker Server down, which was the really bad, not in all scenarios, but it
Yeah.
could. And yeah, that was why we ended up anyway. That's why I would say it's really helpful. And again, also glad I haven't seen it in a while because those are like inscrutable. Not really. You can you by process of elimination you figure it out, but from the outside, like those are inscrutable problems to deal with because it's like I don't know, these plugins are fighting or they have there's a bug in it or something like that. It may not be like a really big issue, but because of where it's located in the software, it can cause catastrophic side effects.
Yep, not a good place to be. And it's a good reminder to keep that in mind as you're troubleshooting. Um, it could be one of those, right? And it's kind of, and I agree with you, it's kind of hard to find because not a lot of this stuff is logged. So you may be looking at the event log and you'll see evidence of a crash, but it won't be obvious where it comes from until you start selectively troubleshooting, divide by half, right? Like let's not do this, and
Yep.
let's see if the problem goes away.
Delete half of it and see if it's still a problem. Delete the other half. Nope. Figured out which half, and then you just start cutting.
All right, so I have a file hosted on a FileMaker Server 21.1. I have it open here in FileMaker 19.6, and I'm doing that to specifically show you the here, right? So I have a script with perform script on server in it. I'm in 19.6, and remember what I said. If I select the compatibility view here on the right-hand side, and I switch over to server, which really means the scripting engine, the FMSE scripting engine, you'll see that line 5 will change color, right? Line 5 will now be indicated as not compatible. That is what I'm doing here, and it's kind of important. I'm asking my script workspace, pretend that this script needs to run on the server by a schedule or through a PSOS. What your script workspace will do, it will basically highlight the script steps that are not supported for that scripting engine. And that compatibility, and Jacob was referring to that a little bit, the script steps that are compatible are not the same necessarily across all 3 scripting engines. So that's why we have this tool in the script workspace to help us figure out, do I have anything in my script that particular scripting engine isn't happy with, right? So if I switch this to the data API, you see that the script step is compatible, but it isn't when I pick the server, right? If I pick the WebDirect one, you'll see that it is compatible. So that fits with the picture that I was painting in the first slide. Depending on the scripting engine that you're in, you can or you cannot use perform script on server. In 19.6, FileMaker 20.0, 20 all the way to 21.0, right? So that's the thing to remember. If I go back and I go to the same file in FileMaker Pro 21.1, so that's the very latest, right? So that's the current in market one. Go to the same script, right? So perform script on server. If I now ask it to show compatibility for server, it doesn't change color. It is compatible. So it stopped being incompatible. It is now supported by this one, right? So that's how you can check if you're uncertain. And I don't even try to remember which script steps are compatible and which ones not, because I have a handy dandy tool there in my script workspace to let me know if something is or isn't, right? So it's an interesting tool. I'm finding that it's not always remembered, if you will, that it's there and that you can play with that. 2 things that I want to highlight. One is a bad habit, and I've seen it in existing solutions, and it's this, right? And this is where people will get in trouble. We'll get into why we think that perform script on server is good a little later, but I want to highlight this because right off the bat, because if you're doing this in your solution before you deploy on server 21.1, you got to keep this in mind, because this is gonna be not good. I've seen solutions where developers do this, right? So they do perform scripts on server, and they check to see if it's compatible or not, and then do it locally, right? So if this is a script that is being handed off to perform script on server, and the developer was relying on the fact that PSOS is not compatible on the server, it would throw error 3. Then it would say, well, I'll just continue with a normal subscript instead of trying to do another PSOS session on there. If you do this in PSOS right now, then this will fail. This will no longer throw an error 3. Error 3 is incompatible, by the way, right? Not supported is what that means. So this will no longer be true, and you will spawn a new session on your server. In this case, like if this is how you wrote your script, that would be unexpected because you weren't thinking that it would, right? So that's a bad design pattern. Like if this is what you were doing, get away from this before you throw your files on 21.1.
We've seen this in deployed solutions, and it's often this. There's like 2 techniques around PSOS that I've seen, and one of them is detecting if it exists like this, checking for error 3. The other one is actually actively firing a PSOS that goes to a layout and comes back or something. But that's usually to try and figure out if it's if you're going to hit one of those overcapacity errors or something like that.
Yeah.
Checking for that kind of a server-side runtime problem. So.
Yep. And this brings up to this one, right? And this is something that I see in code reviews a little too often, where as developers, we tend to think just linearly, like I'm going to do this, it's going to work, so I can continue on to the next thing. We should not assume that this is going to work. And the problem of not working may be a little more acute now that we potentially will be spawning more sessions, PSOS sessions on the server. Fundamentally, it comes down to this, right? And this is one of my FileMaker servers. This is actually the same FileMaker server that this file is hosted on. So I guess it's a quiz question. How many PSOS sessions does FileMaker Server support? Right? And the answer is right here, right? So this is default. I haven't changed it. This is how FileMaker Server defaults, right? So you get 100 PSOS sessions max, right? And the range is anywhere from 0. If you don't want to allow it at all, you can do that. You can disable it here, or 500. But it's a finite number, right? It doesn't depend on the capabilities of your server. Like it doesn't scale up. You cannot get more sessions by using a better server, right? You got to pick a number, and it's a number between 0 and 500. By default, you'll get 100. So back to the FileMaker script. So you do this, right? If you don't check for an error, and the default error there, the one that Jacob was just mentioning, is 812, right? It's called exceeded host capacity. We have to check for that. You cannot assume as a developer that FileMaker Server will have an available PSOS slot ready for you, especially if you do a lot of other things. Like if you're, and we'll get into some of the OData API design patterns that we like, all of which can lead up to you potentially having quite a large number of PSOS sessions running at the same time. So the moral of the story is, don't count on FileMaker Server being ready to accommodate you, right? So you got to check for an error, but the question then is, then what, right? Like, what do you do? And there's really no good answer for that. Like there isn't a one script that you can copy and paste into every single place that you do PSOS, because it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? There's a couple of different outcomes for you to consider. One may be, I'm going to loop and wait for a bit, right? I'll put my script in a loop. I'll wait for a second, then retry, which is fine, right? Like it could be a temporary capacity thing on your server. But you have to think, what if you say try 5 times and you wait a second each? After those 5 retries, what if it's still not working? So what do you do then, right? Do you basically continue and run that same script as a subscript locally? Or do you potentially just bail out and basically say, I'm not doing any of this. I'll tell the client, the user who's trying to do this, that it's not working, and they'll have to come back later, right? So a couple of different strategies there that you need to consider, and there isn't one that will fit every scenario that you had in mind when you were doing perform script on server. And you also have to consider where in the scripted workflow your PSOS came in, right? Like you may have been in the middle of already changing some data somewhere. If this is part of a transaction, maybe you need to bail out of that transaction or undo what you were doing up to that point. So it's not very straightforward, but you have to think about this as a developer. You need to consider that the server will not be ready to do your PSOS and have a way out of that. And then, of course, this one, right? This is and I'm sure Jacob and I talked about this in one of our previous sessions, because we like our servers, right? And we like our servers to do the things that they're designed for and that we dimension them for, right? And you pick a server, and you pick the server resources based on what you intend to do with it, right? Does it need more memory? Does it need faster cores? Does it need more cores? Does it need faster disk I/O? Any of those are important decisions, because they kind of decide how much money you're spending on your server. And again, just like with the number of PSOS sessions, these resources are finite. You cannot magically invent resources. And here's the trap: as a developer, when you're developing on your development server, on your own development server, or on your company's development server, typically those servers aren't very busy. And so you're testing and you're developing, and you said, this is kind of heavy on the client. I don't want the client to have to suffer through whatever long process I'm running here. I'll just throw it at the server. And you go like, wow, this is fast. This is really, yes, I'll do this more. I'll do this everywhere, that kind of thing. And then you go to production, and there's 20 users doing that, and all of a sudden it isn't that fast anymore, right? It's actually slower than doing this locally. So that's a very common trap. I'm sure you've seen that too, Jacob.
Yep. There's a way that you can lean into PSOS that is actually really slick. Like, it's really cool that you can do it, but it's also a catch-22 situation where you kind of overuse the technique and end up hitting your 100 limit or something like that, or even just causing performance problems generally on the server because you're sending everything off. And I'll just, as a little side note, one of the things people forget is, so when any of these script engines are launching on the server side, you think about a new session starting up, like envision it. It's not the same, it's not quite as heavy, but if you think in your head about launching a copy of Pro every time you are firing something off to the server, it's not a one-to-one, it's not that heavy. But if you think about that, think about a startup cost for firing something off to the server. That's going to have an overhead, at least, if nothing else, it does nothing and it goes to the server. You have network latency in there, but probably you're going to send some work to the server. That's the idea. And so thinking about like balancing that, there are certain things that are going to work really well locally, maybe not the very first time you look at a record, but as soon as it's cached, that work can go really fast on your own computer sometimes. Not all processes, but and then for certain other ones, you're like, oh, I can get a bunch of free performance by sending this off to the server. And so you can stampede your server. That's one potential downside there. But you can also just make a process go really fast for the same reason that it could be fast locally. You go up to the server, it has all the records right there. If they're already in RAM, that's one of the like specific, I don't know, like Nick Hunter on our live stream and stuff has gone over different like kind of trade-off decisions you can make for when to push it to server and when to stay local and stuff like that. So
yeah, I like that, and you make a really good point, and it's a point that and if it helps people think about that, the distinction that you're alluding to is the main task of your FileMaker server is to be a database engine, right? It's receiving data to store and basically shelling out data that people are requesting. That's the main task. It's not the only task, but it's the main task. You have the other things like backups and whatnot that are crucial to the server functioning. But by doing things like perform script on server, schedules, potentially even WebDirect. Like WebDirect is a really good analogy. Like if you make your server do WebDirect sessions, these are client sessions. Same with these server-side scripting or PSOS. The distinction there is you're making your FileMaker server be also an application server. Now it has to entertain client sessions and run client sessions on the machine next to its main task as being a database engine. We're not trying to scare people into not doing it. We're just saying, think about that, right? Think about that.
It's just a consideration. Yeah, that's 100% agreement from my end. Just consider it. Think about, consider what you're doing. Consider different choices that you can make and how you can balance that. It's not because there's nothing here I can provide that's like hard advice. You have to know what your application is, what scripts you've written, what they do, how they go all over the database or don't. Maybe they're narrow and they work on one little work unit inside your application, or maybe it's a big reporting or invoicing system and it's crawling all over the place for 20 minutes on Monday or something. So those will be different trade-off decisions that you'll make depending on what it's going to be doing and how it's going to work. So
we have questions. I'm gonna slide myself right in here. Okay. A system default verify all databases. This should run every week through SASE? ?
You're talking about, let's see if I can bring up my server real quick.
That's that default.
Script schedule,
the offline
right?
verify. Yep.
So if I go to here, create a schedule, you're talking about
system script and then drive. Yep.
At the very bottom. Yep.
This one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So is the question, should we or shouldn't we run this weekly?
Yeah, should this run every week?
Oh, I'm also going to piggyback on what Jacob was saying. It kind of depends on your solutions or deployment. You got to run this once in a while, right? Like it's very valuable information to get whether all of your files pass the verification test. I'm liking this one better than trying to piggyback on it to a backup, right? Because it extends the runtime of your backup. So this does the same thing but standalone. Run this occasionally, right? The weekly is probably not a bad frequency to do this. Probably monthly is fine too, but I wouldn't do it less often than monthly, right? Because the downside here is that if it starts failing the verification, you need to have a backup strategy that goes back further than your frequency that you do this, right? So that you increase your chances of having a good, solid backup that you can go back to.
Yep. I'll also tack on a couple things. So, one, the option for verifying a backup during the backup schedule, I believe maintains the files open, although, yeah, they're paused while that's going on, so it may not be amazing for users. Yep, that one. And then the second one is that the inbuilt script schedule that we were just looking at actually closes the file for offline verification. And it's different because it's loud and disruptive in a way that leaving them open, even if they're paused again, that's not like great for users or whatever, but it's still different because you can still see stuff and it doesn't boot you. The other thing is, and I'm just relaying it basically, Klaus, I believe, now does that weekly as a mandatory thing for his clients. I'm just introducing it as a fact and not endorsing it and relaying it. And that is because of, and Wim, you may remember some issues with a recent version of 20 that had some weird features, bugs really. And so Klaus had some kind of an issue with one of their customer files. I'm leaving all details out of it. And basically one of the resolutions to that after working with Claris is they're now just doing verifications on all of it. I'll also add on as far as what RCC policy is, tacking, I don't know, 3 or 4 different things on here. But we do the during backup schedule verification by default on the weekly schedule on all of our servers. So, and that is it probably doesn't matter really, but it's like a 3 a.m. on Saturday type of deal, which most of my clients, that is fully outside of whatever business hours they might have and when people are really going to be actively using their systems. And so there's a little bit of that could probably be replaced with the closed offline verification as well. It may not practically matter for couple of my clients have web stuff that it would matter for, but yeah, so things
Yep.
that the public can think about, people that are watching this after the fact.
Yep, exactly. I like the idea of doing that, attacking it onto a backup when the system is not busy. I've seen people do that by default on all backup schedules, and then complain that the backup takes too long, and basically go from there to doing fewer backups, which isn't the purpose. It kind of
Nope.
defeats the purpose. And Klaus knows what he's doing. He does great work with FileMaker Server, and I highly respect everything that he says about this. So absolutely.
Yeah, I got or inherited maybe, honestly, that's when I was hired. But the weekly schedule from one of our senior engineers, who has done that for years, because not the 20 issue, but something way back in the day, similar sort of problem that was detected early, like a product issue or whatever, but that was detected early by doing those verifications during the backup schedules. So
A question about error 812. Does error 812 only mean that you're exceeding the max PSOS setting, or can it also mean a different problem?
it can also mean a different problem, because I've seen it in two scenarios. One is, the obvious one that we're talking about, which is you've hit your max concurrent PSOS basically. The other one I've seen is, I don't know if this is true in 21 just because I haven't looked at it or ran into this already immediately. But when the script engine is down on the server, that is also the error that we used to get back. As in, like, it's in the middle of a restart, it crashed, something like that. It's unavailable, generally speaking.
Yep, I agree. You'll see it mostly in this scenario, but it's not the only scenario that this particular one will be thrown. But specifically for this scenario, if you're using PSOS, then this is the specific error to trap for.
And then the third question, do you want me to?
Yeah, 25 PSOS simultaneous could be edited. So I thought that you guys just said you could run 100 simultaneous, and that's about when I accidentally killed my server.
Yeah. We talked about Punisher in the last time that I was on with Hamza. We talked about Punisher, and the Punisher, as you may remember, is a tool to stress test a FileMaker server, and it does that through PSOS, right? And it'll go from 1 to 5 to 10 to 25 PSOS sessions at the same time. Your upper limit is what FileMaker Server is configured for, right? Like if it's configured for 500, you can do 500 at the same time. Realistically, on most servers that I've seen, if you have 10 or so, your server performance is really going to degrade, unless you have enough cores. And again, kind of depends on the activity. Like if everything's writing to the same table, it doesn't matter if you have 10, even at 5, it's probably going to start to degrade. So yes, you can have them, but that circles back to what Jacob and I were saying. If you know that that's what you're aiming for, then your architecture of your solution plus the resources that you pick for your server need to be set so that you can really accommodate that.
Yeah, if you need to have a lot of parallelism on your server, in other words, lots of PSOSs running simultaneously, potentially also with many clients connected or something like that, you're going to prioritize cores in that server, because you want your software to be able to go wide when it gets up off the client. So, and for example, fines and all that stuff, it all scales out based on the number of cores as well.
Another sassy question, which I'll toss at you guys before you guys can continue, which is purge temporary databases. How frequently should this run with sassy?
That's a great question.
It is a great question. It doesn't necessarily have to do with SASE. Like it has to do with general server activity, right? Yes, SASE is server activity. What we're talking about here, and let me go back so that we have something to look at. It's this one, which is one of the default ones. This one has been in the product for a little bit. I like it, and typically I do this daily. Again, I pick the time of day that almost nobody's going to be in the system. It can solve for a number of issues. Performance degradation, like gradual performance degradation on your server. We've also seen scenarios where the temporary files kept by FileMaker Server, typically these temporary files will never grow larger than the actual file that they represent. But we've seen it to be not the case, to basically have a runaway temporary file that is eating up gigabytes and gigabytes of your disk. So this can help solve for that. So I typically do this once a day. Like this is a typical nightly routine on the servers.
Nice. That's good to know. I was fishing for advice on it from Claris beyond there's an engineering blog post from when they very first introduced it, but
Yep.
their advice was non-specific. It was more than once a day, I think. That's it. And so I was like, all right, so there's a set of RCC servers that have been set up where they're once a day, and there's a set of RCC servers where I'm doing it hourly, because that is probably about the most nuclear you could get with a setting like that, and then doing it right before the backup runs also.
Yep.
There's been no substantial, like neither of those sets of servers have had problems. Maybe I'm just generating unnecessary load or something on the server for the ones that are running it hourly. But it didn't seem to be detrimental, and I haven't had anybody complain, at least at this point. So.
I wouldn't worry about the extra load that this particular schedule does on the server. Like I said, I do it daily because the issues that it's solving, I don't see them so often that I think I need to do more. But clearly, if you're in a scenario where your server is kind of iffy and it does weird things, then do this more often. Absolutely.
Cool. We have another question hanging out on YouTube, which is PSOS. Can you stack a PSOS and then a PSOS and then a PSOS? Basically, how many PSOSs can you get nested before it gives up?
Up to the limits that FileMaker Server will allow, or the hundreds or whatever number that you picked. But yeah, you can.
Yeah.
The question gives me the creeps a little, right? Because it's going like you gotta be so careful.
How many layers? How can we
Exactly.
can we get the 100 PSOS call chain?
Exactly. Here is some rope. Please don't hang yourself, right? It's I've said it like we get a lot of extra power with this, no doubt. Like this is a great feature to have. It gives us more options than not having it. And I've said it, with great power comes great responsibility, right? It is, and let's not be blind for that. It is easier to shoot yourself in the foot with this now.
I'm excited for 2025 because it's going to be another round of rescuing servers that have a runaway loop that has been PSOSed inside of PSOS and is now.
I'm sure. Yeah, don't run with scissors, kid. Like, don't do it.
Correct. Yeah.
You heard it here first. The good news is that the troubleshooting this is kind of easy, and we'll show you that actually, unless there's any more questions, Margaret.
No, you guys are good to keep going.
Yeah. So, and you'll see that in a sec when I show you the design pattern that we do for the data API that we could not do with the OData API, and now we can, and I'll explain in a sec. So if you think you have runaway PSOSs, go to your admin console first, because they'll show up in here, right? And you'll be able to see, and I'll show in a minute, you can see on the right-hand side, I got two pro sessions, right? My 19.6 and my 21, and you can tell what they are. You can even, if you hover over them, it will tell you what version of the pro client they're using. If it's a PSOS session, it will say FMSE, right? So right off the bat, you can tell which of these things is a PSOS session and whether you have more than you'd expect and that kind of thing, right? All right. Let's go in here. So the design pattern that is now possible with the OData API that we couldn't do before is one that we use a lot with the data API. And it goes somewhat like this. You're integrating with your FileMaker solution. So you need to call something a script, right? You need to call a script inside your FileMaker solution from the outside. Now that script it could be a long-running script. It could be a script that basically receives a bunch of data that you're sending into FileMaker and then needs to process through it, right? So one of the things that typically happens is you have a script. I'll call it webhook receiver. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And you do everything in that script because that's kind of normal, right? That's what the script is for. The script needs to process the data, so it'll process. At the end, when it's done, it'll exit with true, which typically is the signal for the data API to say nothing bad happened, like it's fine, like you can report that the script ran fine. In my case, it'll wait for 1 second and it'll do that 60 times. right? So it'll run for a minute is really what that script is doing. So what if we do this, right? So if so this is the data API. So I have to log in first, get my token. I got my token. You could, using the data API, you can run the script directly, right? So there's a get endpoint. Not a big fan of this one because it's a get. You have to append all of your parameters in the URL. And so you're restricted to what that is. The way that we usually do that is we actually misuse the find. And we typically have one table with a layout with one record, and we always do a find on the primary key for that one. It's not expensive because you're always never going to get more than one record back. But what we really want is this, right? We want to be able to run a script, and we want to be able to basically pass it a parameter as long as it goes, which fits very nice because it's a post. Everything goes in the body. I don't have to worry about the URL length restrictions that it may have. That's kind of beside the point. So I'm going to run this script, right? So the script is running. If I go to my FileMaker server, you can see I have a data API session. That data API session is now running that script, right? It's a long script. It's going to run for a minute. So you can see it's doing its thing over here. So it'll just run and run and run and run and run. Now, as a design pattern, that is not what REST calls are for, right? Because remember, the data API is a REST call, and you can tell, right? I got an error. My caller said, "What the hell are you doing? Like, what are you making me wait for? I'm done waiting. I hang up the phone." That's what this error is for. Now, on the FileMaker server side, it's still running, right? Like it'll finish on the server side, but the caller basically threw an error, right? So from the caller's perspective, something went wrong. From your perspective, the FileMaker developer, everything is fine. Like this will run to completion and it'll complete. Like the processing that you made it do will finish just fine, right? So now you're at odds with the people that you're integrating with, right? They'll say it's failing, and you go, it's not failing. I can see the results, right? And it really comes down to the fact that you're using REST, which is meant for simple requests, short-lived sessions, and you're making it entertain a long session. It gave up after 30 seconds, right? So the length that the caller is going to be willing to wait, you have no control over that. It could be 15 seconds, could be 5 seconds, could be 30 seconds. If you have control over it, you can set a timeout yourself. But even if you have control over the timeout, it's kind of arbitrary because that script on the server, it may take a minute, it may take 2 minutes because maybe your server is really busy at the time, or maybe there's more data now than there was when you developed this thing, right? So in the REST world, if you will, there is this notion of returning a response call that says accepted. So the usual 200 is everything's fine. Like you sent me something, I've done something with that, and it's fine. There's also the notion of 201 accepted. You can use 201 created too, but that's a slightly different meaning. 202 means the caller sends you something and you return, you automatically tell it, acknowledged, I received it. I'm going to process it asynchronously, but you don't have to wait on the phone, is really what you're saying. Like you can hang up. Like I got this, I'll work with that. Which is one of the standards, if you will, in doing this kind of thing. So if you wanted to do this in FileMaker, instead of calling this script, you could create a script that does this, right? So this is the script that is being called by the data API. Inside that one, you do perform script on server with no wait. That's kind of key because otherwise the script will wait for it to finish. So you're basically saying the data API, and that's where that handoff between the data API script engine and the FMSC scripting engine comes into play. The data API engine is invoked because you run a script, but it basically says, okay, FMSC, I got something for you, throws it over there, continues to here, and exits, and it's done, right? It's very, very fast. And the processing will happen offline because the caller is not going to get the benefit of the result of your script. But usually that's fine. Like maybe it's just you give a bunch of instructions and whoever is calling that script doesn't need to know what the end result is. It just needs to know that you got this, right? It just needs to know that you're going to do something with that. So if I do the same thing here, so I'll just call this other script and run this. I got my 200 response. You can't really control the response that FileMaker gives. I mentioned 202. I just put it in the script result here, right? Response 202 accepted. Kind of funny because you'd have to tell the people parse that, not parse this. But see how fast it returned. Like the caller says, "Okay, I'm done," and it did that in 100 milliseconds, right? On the FileMaker server side, right? I now see my long-running script in an FMSE session. I didn't hang up. I didn't kill the data API session, although I certainly can if I want to. So I can go back in here and say, you know what, I'm going to log out of that session and come back in here. So now I don't have a data API session anymore, but my long-running script is just running just fine, just as I asked it to, right? So that is a design pattern that we've been using for a long time. In any kind of integration where something needs to send data to FileMaker, FileMaker needs to process it, right? So we use this asynchronous model where we receive it through the data API, we throw it at Perform Script on server to the FMSE engine, and the caller is fine. The caller can move on. Remember, you couldn't do this with the OData API up to 21.1 because the OData API was running FMSE. That was its scripting engine, and that one did not support Perform Script on server. So that's really the big change. So if I came in here and did an OData API call, it looks a little different to the way that the URL looks because the script name is in here. So I can do this, give my parameter in here. So now this would execute exactly the same way as the data API. It would create an FMSE session that I can hang up and get a response back, and it will spawn another FMSE. Actually, let's see if this actually works, right? So see, I got the response directly. If I go in here, I now have an FMSE with a long running one. So for a split second there, I had two FMSEs, the one from the data API, but that one was really short-lived, just long enough to receive and return and be killed. But I have one that now executes my long-running script. The caller is fine. Like the caller got its proper response. It says, I'm done. Like I can move on to the next thing. For us, this is major, right? The fact that we can now use that same design pattern with the OData API as we can with the data API means that we're not held back now. We were not using the OData API because we couldn't use a pattern like this, and now we're free to switch over to the OData API if we want to. The OData API has a couple of benefits over the data API. That would be a totally different session. I'm sure that John Renfrey was here for talking about the OData API for a long time.
I was gonna say we had a stream recently on that, and it was very well loved. I recommend everyone go watch it. It's on my list of stuff to go back and watch because I couldn't attend it.
Yep, and John is the expert on OData in our community. So yeah, if you're even remotely interested in that stuff, go watch those videos. All right, that's it. That's really what I wanted to show you, right? Like, so we covered the fact that there's three scripting engines, what they do, what they don't do, what they did do, what would they do now. Really, the big change is that of the three, they now all three support Perform Script on server, right? So they're now equal in that respect. So no matter what entry point into your FileMaker server you have scripting-wise, whether it's to the OData API, data API, XML API, WebDirect, schedules, another PSOS session, they can all now do Perform Script on server in their own right. So it's a great thing to have. Keep in mind that if you had some bad habits, change them, right? Before you dive into this, don't shoot yourself in the foot. And do think about the proper error trapping and handling for for these occasions that you will run into where server just is out of sessions or the scripting engine isn't available, you got to be able to handle that and branch accordingly.
I'm excited for 21.1. I'm excited because all not my engineers actually, not that many of our CC engineers are using this error 3 catching system for PSOS detection that's in the bad script there. So we're good. But
I don't think it's in mine, but I'm gonna go check because there was definitely.
I'm just not naming the engineer that I know did it because I think when they this and Wim noted earlier in the stream there was like a secret flag that you could turn on after this thing was originally introduced into FileMaker because it's been in there for a little bit, but it's official now, which is why we can tell you about it. So when that first happened, there was a little panic that ran around the community because, and it's what we're covering today, some of the potential downsides, the ways you can shoot yourself in the foot, running too many scripts, PSOSing 100 layers deep, or, I'm making a joke about this, but someone will do it someday. I will probably man that recovery at some point. Next year.
Yep. The feature flag, I'm trying to remember when it was first put in there, like 19.3, 19.4 thereabouts. It's been there quite a bit.
There was a lot of talk. Sorry, that's what I was going to say. There was a lot of talk in the community around that time because it was like, hey, we're going to change fundamental behavior, which is PSOS on PSOS will now function. That will no longer be an error 3 as it has been for the entire rest of the, at that point, almost 30 years or maybe even 30 years of platform history. I don't know if we've had PSOS for that long because I don't think you had server that long, but like they added it and hey, this is going to be a fundamental change. And so everyone had to start running around. For the people that had used that technique, they had to go clean up all their old solutions.
Yep.
So I'm actually in some ways thankful for the time basically from Claris to let some of that work get done, and because there's an amount of this that's going to happen at some point in the future where people won't be like a tightly integrated, maintained with a partner solution or something like that, and they're going to go up to the current version of the software, and it will have worked for a while, and they're going to have some interesting behavior after this. And so I think people in the partner community are going to get some of those calls at some point soon.
I'm sure.
But
we have. Go ahead.
I was just going to say at that point, it's a conversation about maintenance and investment in your solutions. Not that this is a change. It's something Claris is kind of, we'll say, deciding over the top or whatever, and that we in some ways have to deal with, but that also is like a huge upside for the platform. It's a double-edged sword, as we say. It's a huge benefit and can be a problem for some clients. But it's going to be one of the exciting things, is because for people that are working with partners already, they'll be able to take advantage of these things. And for everyone else, it like I said, it may bring up a maintenance point because there's a lot of FileMaker solutions out there. People haven't talked to them in years. And there's a lot of new features in the platform we can take advantage of. This is one of them, but there's been a lot of other stuff added recently too. So and that's all very exciting for people, making their businesses more efficient and faster and more performant and all that stuff. So
I am going to fling a question at you guys, the question that I think was inevitable. Thank you, Ken, for asking it. A more general question. Are we comfortable putting this version on production servers? AKA, should I upgrade? Or update in this case?
It's a really good question. It's fairly new. You probably should be putting it on your dev and test servers right now to see what's going on. And the advice doesn't change, right? Like do whatever kind of testing that you can right there. Give it a little bit of time, like on a daily basis. Make it run through some backups, throw some load at it, right? So do all the usual things that you do, but do it in dev and test first, and then start rolling it out. I'm sure there's a couple of I can't off the top of my head. I'm sure that there are a few like bug fixes that are fixed in 21.1. Nothing major comes to mind, but it's something to keep in mind. Like if you have specific issues that you had with 20.3 or 21.0 and the release notes say that they fix something, that would mean like accelerate through the adoption, but still go through that phase where you do that on dev and test first, right?
Yeah, I basically agree with that. We're I don't know. I haven't run into too many issues with 20, at least none of our clients anyway have run into issues with 21. So I'm currently at the point of continue to upgrade people and looking for problems. No problems doesn't mean no problems. No problems means no observed problems or no encountered problems. It doesn't mean none exist. So, and that's why test it first, do some kind of a development environment, some kind of a test environment, something like that, where you can try the new version out separate from your production system, if you have that. So
Because your server might be the magical one that explodes.
yeah. Well, and to Wim's note about potential bug fixes that are in 21, I know of specific bug fixes that are FileMaker Server database engine crashers. Or crasher, I guess, probably only one technically. It's one bug from my perspective. I don't how many bugs in the code, I don't know, but one bug, one tracked problem, from my perspective, I know is fixed in 21.1, and a client with that problem was immediately upgraded just about on, I think, the day after launch day, actually. That went perfectly successfully and fixed their problem. So the advice will be customized. So I think that's why the general advice is please test. Try not to be, don't make your production server upgrade the first one that ever goes to 21. Run it somewhere else first for just a little bit at least, and confirm things are otherwise working well. But like I said, I'm aware of some specific bugs that are fixed in 21.1, like that specific patch version. And so those clients were given the no, you need to update immediately because actually the one I'm thinking of was on a debug version, and there's a substantial performance impact to those versions of FileMaker. Basically, they're very slow. And so even basically, like I was trying to get Claris to tell me the bug fix is in that version. It is. So that client went up immediately. Their performance issue went away. So did their crashing issue. So it's, excellent news basically for them. But
And the other good advice there is monitor the community, right? Like be on community.claris.com, right? So because there are people that feel like they need to be guinea pigs, so at least benefit from what they're saying, right? So monitor what's happening there.
Yeah, yep, I agree. It's one of the things that we look for, and that's why I say always tell me if you're having problems or something like that. Maybe it's a bug, maybe it's not. All of the information that you can provide if you're working with us or working with Wim, or if you have an engineer or don't in the community, fine. But always trying to look at information like that to pick up. All right, there's maybe I'm having a problem, or I'm looking at maybe there will be problems. You can also look at like problems people are having with a new version. Maybe there are problems with the old versions too, and you can look at them and go, oh, we don't have any of those issues. There's an old bug I could talk about, where I think it was fixed in 19.5 or something, where if you had plus characters in the file name on WebDirect, it was like a very specific bug. It wouldn't download, or it failed as a short version. I don't remember the exact details, but it was one of those bugs where it's catastrophic for a customer that it affects. And if it doesn't affect you, it's completely irrelevant as a bug. And so I can look at that version and say, are you guys doing big file downloads off of WebDirect? And for most of my clients, the answer was no. So they went to that version without issue. There was no problem. I had one client, I actually didn't know this, and that was, you figure it out and you go, oh, make a different choice. But we had one client who did. They ran into the bug. So they were also first to go to the next version when it came out. And we had to, kind of manage it for them while that was an issue with the specific version that they were using. But for a lot of clients, you can do like as a partner or somebody like that who's very deeply involved with the platform, you can go and look and kind of consider, you're not going to be perfect every time, but like looking at where are the areas in the app where we're seeing bugs in the new version. Are those high traffic areas for us in our solution? You can kind of ask and think about questions like that, and try and gauge like what your risk level is for upgrading. Sometimes you'll go see a bug that's like, that's a core bug and the exact thing that we use in FileMaker. Okay, maybe it's not a great version to go up to immediately. So but those are all great conversations. If you're an independent developer, talk to your clients about those. If you're somebody's client, go talk to your partner. They'll have advice on all that stuff, and kind of you can get actual customized advice as to should we go to this version? Yes, no. Is it going to negatively impact me? Are we likely to see bugs? So you can have that conversation with them. That's all.
Thank you both so much. Seriously, it's always fantastic having either of you on, and then having both of you on is double fun. That's not great advice. Sorry, I just looked over at Discord, and the advice is you only live once, no guts, no glory. I don't think that's the best advice for your servers. So,
We do not endorse that as a backup policy.
so with that being said, I'm going to let you two go. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I will see you guys Monday, as in my Discord, YouTube, all you people that are my regulars. And hopefully I will see Wim and Jacob, you both again sometime soon. Have a good one.
I'm sure you will.
Most certainly.
Bye.